Bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Whoa, Tim, look at all those planets and stars. I'm doing a bit of time traveling, and it's spooky out here in this parallel universe full of weird coincidences.
Well, how's that?
Well, it's one damn synchronicity after another. I was just talking to my assistant, Carol, about doing some artwork for a little booklet my friend Wally Elmark, David Bowie's Personal White Witch. She wrote it in 1972. I couldn't find my copy. I'd been planning to do that for a reprinter for a while, but I came across one on eBay, so I sent for it, and I got that in the mail, and I didn't realize that oh, there goes another planet, and here comes a comet. I better move over this way. Well, it's kind of strange, but I didn't realize that I had written the introduction to this little booklet.
Well, that's kind of strange. Is there more to that?
Well, kind of. You know how I'm always being under the siege by some synchronicity or another. After putting this little booklet aside, I started reading my email, and there was an email from a Wally. Now, I've never received an email from a Wally before. Of course, it wasn't my friend Wally because she's deceased, except if you believe some of the other guests that have been on, and you refer to the book that we did on the matrix control system of Philip K. Dick. We know that sometimes the deceased have a very symbolic ways of getting in touch with us, but I had never received an email from a Wally before, and here it was. I mean, within 2 minutes after I had put the booklet aside that I'm going to reprint. So what the heck does that all mean?
I don't know. Maybe she's showing her approval to reissue the book.
That's what I would think.
Well, there you go then. And you know that also ties in with our show tonight.
Well, why don't I get back over there? What? Here goes that other last planet. Oh, all right. Well, that was just an exploding star. So I see the KCOR radio studio, and I'm going to pull up and land right on the roof.
All right. Well, you know, Tim, we've got two fantastic guests tonight. We have with us, we have Dr. Eric Wargo and Larry Flaxman. Now, Eric is the author of the new book, Time Loops, Precognition, Retrocausation, and the Unconscious. He has a PhD in anthropology from Emory University and works as a science writer and editor in Washington, D.C. Now, in his spare time, he writes about science fiction, consciousness, and the paranormal at his popular blog, The Nightshirt. And I should point out that Time Loops is his first book, and I tell you, for a first book, it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. Now, also with us tonight is Larry Flaxman. Now, Larry is the best-selling author and researcher, and is on a mission to inform, empower, and entertain those fascinated by the paranormal. For nearly 2 decades, Flaxman has been actively involved in paranormal research and hands-on field investigation, with a strong emphasis on attempting to apply the scientific method to unexplained phenomena. Flaxman is redefining the field of consciousness via the use of real-time EEG analysis of the experiencer. He is the president and senior researcher of the Arkansas Paranormal and Anomalous Studies team, which has become one of the nation's most respected paranormal research organizations. Now, Larry is the author of such books as 1111, The Time Prompt Phenomena, The Meaning Behind Mysterious Signs, Sequences, and Synchronicities, The Grid, Exploring the Hidden Infrastructure of Reality, viral mythology, how the truth of the ancients was encoded and passed down through legend, art, and architecture. And this book is From the Future, which was co-written with Marie D. Jones. So now this is the first time that Eric and Larry have been on Exploring the Bizarre. So I want our audience out there to give them a big hand and welcome, gentlemen, to our program.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
definitely.
Greetings.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, greetings, you guys. Good to be on with fellow coincidencers. If that's I don't know if that's an exact the word, but
It is now.
I know.
It is now, yeah.
Yeah, well, you bet. I've coined quite a few words on this show over the last couple of years. That's for sure. Hey, but clue me in, Larry. Now, I just filled a book, a 450-page book. Half of it was my synchronicities, and I'm not talking about waking up at night and seeing, like a certain time on the clock, or thinking of somebody and calling on, they call on the phone a couple of days later. I'm talking about hardcore synchronicities, and it's you're the guest tonight, so I don't want to go into my synchronicities. But why do they pick on me?
Well, I don't think that they're necessarily picking on you. I think that the synchronicities that you're experiencing are obviously some type of internal subconscious wake-up call. So, everyone has those experiences.
But they happen so often, and they're so off the wall and bizarre that, I know if Freud talked a little bit about synchronicities and stuff, but this is way beyond that. I mean, this is like a communications from somewhere else.
Have you checked yourself for any weird implants?
I don't think I've got enough going on here. That's about the only thing I can imagine. I'm visiting the doctor like once a week. That's the next one. Pardon me, sir. Who takes care of your implants?
Exactly.
What I got 11. I got 11 doctors. I don't know. I got to get another one that they don't even have working there. I don't think. No, I don't.
Yeah.
And where would the implants be from?
That is definitely not my area of expertise. I really can't answer that one. But it's interesting if you're really truly having that many synchronistic experiences that you just absolutely can't explain.
Yeah.
I would say that personally, I think that is telling you your body is screaming at you to pay attention to something. It's something probably subconscious, something you haven't thought about, whether it's something financial, personal, medical. There's probably something that you are.
It's like all of them.
Well, it's probably something that you are already aware of, but it's your body trying to get your attention. It's your subconscious trying to bubble that information to the forefront, so you pay attention to whatever it is. In daily life, most people get kind of caught up in the moment, and they kind of don't really see the forest through the trees. And those synchronistic experiences are often that kind of under the radar way of subconsciously trying to break through and make you aware of something that you need to be aware of.
Well, so you don't think that there's any intelligence behind them? Charles Fort, who I'm sure you've heard of, he thought that we were pieces on a chessboard, and somebody was controlling the movements of the chess pieces, right? Kind of like John Keel's theories about the multi-universe and parallel universes and all.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I don't know. I mean, it just seems that some of these things seem to be more than just the random, that they seem to be placed before us. Well, like this one here, from my friend Wally. She's been deceased since 1972, but I think about her from time to time, and then coming across this booklet that I wanted to reprint for years, and then all of a sudden I get an email now from a Wally, and I've never gotten an email from a Wally. No, it's a junk email. But we had the same thing happen before on the show here. We had a special about my friend Vivian St. John, and that day I printed out an email. The doctor that I was going to see in the hospital, it says, "Here's a message from Vivian." I didn't know what her first name was. These things just pile up. But anyway, what did you see in your own personal life that led you to believe that the 1111 or some of these things had some deep meaning?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So let me give you a little bit of backstory about how kind of the book came about to kind of give you the understanding of personal experiences that I've had. So we were approached, Marie and I were actually approached by our publisher to write a book about time prompt phenomena and number synchronicities. So I obviously had heard of number synchronicities. I've kind of experienced that kind of on and off throughout my life. But that idea of people having these experiences repetitively and people having numbers that seem to follow them throughout their life, that was a wholly new concept to me. In fact, Ray and I both thought that we were going to have extreme difficulty finding content matter for the book because neither one of us had ever heard of the phenomena, nor had either one of us ever really experienced it. But now, check this out. So we agreed to do the book because it was a decent amount of money, so we're not going to turn it down, right? So we start doing a little bit of research, and things start happening. What does that mean? Well, here's a perfect example. So I said just a minute ago that those experiences, I never had those experiences, right? Well, obviously I did. All of us probably do at some point. You just don't really pay attention. Here's a great way to kind of exemplify that. You decide that you want to buy a brand new car, right? You've had your mind on a purple Humvee for your entire life for whatever reason. You want a purple Humvee. You think it's a unique vehicle. It's extremely large. It's got, all kinds of super nice features to it. So you save up your money for that purple Humvee. You go down to the dealership. You order that purple Humvee. They give you a call in 2 weeks, and you come back in 2 weeks to pick up your purple Humvee. As you're filling out the paperwork and obviously signing away your life, the dealership hands you the keys. You jump in your Humvee for the very first time. You're super, super excited. You start the vehicle, you pull out of the dealer parking lot, and of course it gets awful gas mileage, so the very first thing you have to do is stop at the gas station. But as you're on the way to the gas station, you start noticing purple Humvees. Now, this was a vehicle that you knew, you were certain was a unique vehicle. You've never seen a purple Humvee. One of the reasons why you wanted it, you knew that it was a rare vehicle that not everyone had. The minute that you had reason to start noticing the purple Humvee, your brain instantaneously started turning on the ability for you to notice that kind of clear out the white noise and focus in on what was always there in front of you. Those purple Humvees were not as rare as you thought they were. They were always around you. You just never really had the need to pay attention and to notice it. Then when you purchased your purple Humvee, your brain switches into a different mode and you start realizing that they're actually all around you. So very similar to me. That's exactly the same experience that kind of mirrors for me. When we decided to write the book and accepted the proposal to write the book, I started having experiences like that. I would start to notice things that were always there, that always were in front of me, that always were certainly kind of external and things that I should have seen, but kind of glanced over and again, didn't really see the forest through the trees. And I started noticing those things. So I didn't have a need to before I started writing the book, but then started writing the book and, oh my gosh, I'm having these experiences. How do I explain it? So that is what I think is the basis of number synchronicities and folks that are having those experiences, that those things are always there. You just don't have a need really to see them until something happens.
Well, now do you... Okay, there are some people, though, I mean, who have had experiences along this line, like Philip K. Dick that I wrote about. He was of course, very well-known science fiction writer. We've had one of his wives on the show, Tessa Dick, a number of times. And there are some people who believe that at least some of these synchronicities are under intelligent control. I don't know if you're familiar with a researcher by the name of John C. Lilly.
No.
Okay, well, John C. Lilly was a uh, wrote a book called I think it was called The Eye of the Cyclone, and he was the first individual who claimed under the influence of the drug ketamine that he had actually
Hmm.
communicated with dolphins and extraterrestrials. Well, he was also had a wide and pretty wild variety of synchronicities, and he came to the conclusion that there was actually a synchronicity like a review board or a control board. Now, I guess the etheric somewhere. I mean, that are, which brings us to the question, or is everything before us like predestined, or is somebody actually out there kind of nudging us in a certain direction? After having all
Hmm.
these experiences, I mean, I tend to think that, I don't believe in the Christian concept of God, but there's got to be some external force, maybe that was left here, a million years ago by the ancient astronauts, or something like a giant computer, or something is hidden in a cave. John Keel talked about the eighth tower. He had these towers, I think, in 8 different places around the planet that were sending out signals. I don't know. It's just it's just a concept. So, all right, you started having these experiences. Did your co-author? I know I've interviewed her actually. I think the interview is in the book. She started having some
Hmm.
of these experiences as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, until we both had a need to, we didn't really have those
Mhm.
experiences. And then once we kind of had the need or the necessity
Uh,
to, is when we started having them. Yeah.
well, now you've also written about time travel. Is that not the concept of your
Oh
most
gosh.
recent book? Yes.
No, that's not our most recent book.
Oh,
Yeah, we've
okay.
written a lot. Actually, that's
Yeah.
gosh, we've written 10 books together.
Uh,
But no, our time travel book was, I think, our fourth or fifth book.
mhm. Yeah, I think we've discussed that on the air here. But is there, some? Okay, well, time travel. Are we able to do it? I mean, can we accomplish it, or is it just or is it just a far flung science fiction fantasy?
So I think that's a loaded question. So I think we do time travel already every day, every single one of us. In fact, any progression into the future we measure in seconds, right? So as we're sitting here talking, we are in effect traveling into the future simply by the progression of time. But even beyond that, I mean, if you look at the kind of the whole concept of time itself, and my belief very strongly is that time is not quite the linear construct that we believe it to be. So when you say, are we already doing it? Can we time travel? Is it possible? Then that brings up a whole plethora of logistical questions. So does that mean, are we physically time traveling forward or backward in time? Well, if you think that time really doesn't have a forward or backward, well, time is really, it doesn't have a forward or backward component. In nature, time is right now. So man developed the concept of time as a way to track the progression of events. So in nature, there really is no such thing, but it's a man-made construct, and we've followed it for thousands of years. So the idea of being able to travel in time is really, again, kind of a man-made construct as well. But when you start thinking about the traditional idea of time travel, being able to go forward into the future to see things that have not happened yet, or being able to travel to the past to witness events and historical things that have occurred, now you're talking at a wholly different area. So do I think we're able to physically time travel into the past? No. I don't think that we are quite there technologically. Now, there's a variety of possible hypotheses as far as how we could do it, involving black holes, involving different ideas around acceleration of speed. There's a variety of different ways that we think theoretically it can be done, but we don't have the technology today really to achieve that. Now, with that being said, again, I do think that we're time traveling today. When you go to sleep at night and you have a dream, you don't really have a time envelope within that dream, right? So during that dream state, you have the ability to go anywhere basically within the time-space continuum that you really want to without having any physical limitations on your body. So in fact, there are many people that talk about being able to astral travel, both forward and backward in time. So I think it's happening, but I don't know that it's quite to the level of scientific sophistication that we would hope it to be yet.
How about misplaced artifacts? Have you done any study on that? You know, where they have found human footprints and rocks right next to dinosaurs and other things. You know, weird things that misplaced
the
things
spark
that don't.
plug.
Yeah. How do you account for that?
No, that's something that is absolutely fascinating to me. And that's, you know, there's a lot of ideas behind that. You know, are future man able to somehow time travel and we're able to leave these artifacts for us either accidentally or purposely for us to discover? You know, I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I would like to think that at some point in the future, we would have the technology to physically time travel and be able to traverse the timeline. But, you know, that also brings up a whole other gamut of different questions that probably one has to deal with as far as moral implications of doing that as well. And, you know, if 500 years in the future, if we have the ability to basically transcend time and space and go whenever, wherever we want, should we? Simply having the ability to do it, should we actually do that? What if, you know, that the entire idea of the grandfather paradox and other different protection mechanisms that we believe are in place, what if those things really are not quite as strengthened as we think? And what if it really is possible to go back in time and alter the outcome? You know, there's a lot of questions around that, and I don't pretend to have all the answers to it by any means at all. You know, I think there is obviously those moral implications or things that should be outside of science to determine. I think science has their goal and their needs to, but the moral piece of that, I think, is a much greater question than being able to do it.
Well, I think we are upon a break, Tim, are we not?
Yeah, that's right. We got about 30 seconds before we have to go to our first break of the evening. So when we come back, we will bring Eric Wargo into the conversation, and we'll be talking about his book, Time Loops. So stay tuned, and we will be right back in just a few minutes for Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Our guests tonight are Larry Flaxman and Eric Wargo. Now, Eric is the author of the new book, Time Loops, Precognition, Retrocausation, and the Unconscious. Eric, I've really enjoyed your book. You know, a lot of the ideas and concepts in it, you know, I've seen bandied around at various places for quite a while, but you're really one of the first to bring it all together and really just flesh it out. So, what's the genesis of this book? I mean, what happened that you decided that you were going to write this?
Yeah, well, it's a kind of interesting story. It's kind of a roundabout journey I've had the last, I guess, decade. It actually began, oddly enough, with a couple of UFO sightings. I saw,
really?
I saw a couple. You know, I'd always, you know, since I became, you know, when I was a kid, you know, that was the era of, you know, In Search Of and that sort of stuff. So I was interested in that sort of thing. But then I kind of grew up and grew out of that. as an adult, and sort of became, I'm basically a skeptic about things like, a skeptic about the paranormal, not like rejecting it, but just not really thinking about it that much.
Right.
And anyway, but I saw a couple UFOs in 2009, both within like a month of each other, and they weren't anything spectacular. They were, just lights in the sky, but it got me reading. It got me sort of into the literature on UFOs. And if you delve deeply at all into the topic, you realize, well, first of all, there's a lot of actually really serious people doing really serious research, but you wind up reading Jacques Vallée, who, of course, he sort of bridged his study of UFOs with his, he was also involved in the really interesting ESP research going on in the 1970s in Palo Alto at SRI, where he was working, and he sort of saw the psychic dimensions of this. And I had been particularly, I guess, skeptical of ESP and psychic phenomena, but his writings really made me realize, hey, there's something there, and that kind of took me down the rabbit hole. I wound up kind of leaving. I was sort of writing about UFOs on my blog and stuff, but I wound up kind of leaving that behind and really pursuing the ESP and psychic phenomena stuff, because that seemed just really more interesting and more bizarre to me. And so I wound up reading the literature on precognition and getting very interested in precognition particularly. And so I've been writing about it on my blog for several years now, and people keep, readers keep telling me, you need to like sort of gather this all together and into a book. And so that's what I did. So it's a weird kind of crooked story there. But, I agree with a lot of the things that Larry was saying in the last segment, because, he pointed out that, these things are happening all the time, and we just don't notice it. And there's lots of really interesting reasons why we don't notice it. And that, and my book really is as much about the taboos that sort of prevent us from seeing these phenomena in our lives, and that kind of prevent us from thinking critically and thinking carefully about them. And, like I noticed as I think pretty much anyone who becomes interested in ESP starts noticing, ESP phenomena in their own lives, and they start noticing, synchronicities and precognitive dreams and so forth. And in my case, I'd always been interested in dreams. I'd always, in fact, recorded my dreams as much as whenever I had the time to, but never really noticed, dream precognition until, I started delving into the literature. And then I started, that sort of just gets you to kind of pay attention to, the connections between your dreams and then subsequent events in your life. And if you're not paying attention to things happening in your life, you're not going to notice this stuff happening. But when I did that, I started noticing, God, I'm having precognitive dreams all the time. And I think everyone is. And, so yeah, this stuff is happening all the time, and we just have these blinders to it.
Well, now, when you said taboos, I mean, are you talking about like societal taboos, or just personal taboos that this is just too weird, I'm not going to think about it type of thing?
Both. There are lots of societal taboos, lots of cultural taboos. Among them are we live in a very individualistic, freedom-loving society, obviously, and for people in our society, precognition really brings up thorny issues of free will, because inevitably you think of, well, if this dream came from the future, do I have the freedom to change that future? Blah blah blah. It leads to all these the grandfather paradox that Larry, you guys mentioned earlier, and stuff. So there's that. I mean, we don't like to think about a future that already exists that could then, retroactively influence us in the present, because that implies that maybe we don't really have the freedom to change our fate. But there's also a lot of, so that's a cultural kind of taboo.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of personal ones too, and I've discovered these. I deal with these every day. Like you start getting interested in precognitive, like dreaming or precognitive remote viewing or whatever. You start practicing this stuff, and you're very eager for it to work. But then you immediately start worrying about premonitions of death and illness, and you start, you get really paranoid. I mean, it can really, it can kind of make you a little crazy to really take this stuff seriously, because then you start worrying, oh my God, you have this dream, did it, and it seemed kind of ominous, does that mean, something terrible is going to happen to me, or something terrible is going to happen to my child or my wife? You start really, kind of brooding about questions of fate and so forth. So, like, again, so my book is really as much about, the first part is sort of the obligatory, let's tell some, famous instances of this, and then let's summarize the laboratory research that supports it. But the rest of the book is really more about the kind of taboos that kind of prevent us from thinking clearly about it, and that kind of, I think, send us off in wrong directions, I think, sometimes.
Well, if you do I'm sorry, go ahead, Larry. Did you have a question? Nope. Guess
no,
not.
I didn't.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard somebody else start to ask a question in the background. Okay. Well, okay. I was just wondering, when you look, and at least statistically, I suppose, with a lot of these cases of when people report precognition, it seems like the majority involves fairly nasty stuff, deaths, disasters, things like that. Is there something about the strong emotions that that seems to, I don't know, carry more power, whatever the word seems to, I don't know, maybe just make people just more aware, rather than, having a precognitive dream that you were, out picking flowers the next day or something.
Exactly. Yeah, you're not going to have a precognitive dream about, just a pleasant, uneventful Sunday dinner. You're going to have a precognitive dream. Often the ones that kind of rise to our attention tend to be those that are about death and disaster. But partly that's an effect of, well, what experiences really move a person to the point where they will write them down or share them with others. I don't think that all precognition is focused on death and disaster, but it is focused on survival in the kind of broader sense. It's focused on surviving close calls, or surviving, deaths and disasters. But those deaths and disasters may happen to other people, and they may happen in the news. It's like, I notice that I have precognitive dreams about unsettling news stories, or interesting news stories that provoke some sort of existential thought in me. And that's one of the arguments I make in the book, is that we don't precognize events. We don't precognize things in the future. We precognize our own future thoughts and feelings. And this, that's a kind of a new twist that in the sort of literature on precognition, that I think is really important, and it kind of brings it down from the level of kind of the supernatural or whatever to, I think there's going to be a physical explanation for this, I think, in decades to come, involving quantum processes in the brain. I think that the brain is really linking us to the future.
Aren't there cases, though, like the JFK assassination, where it seems that there were any number of people who saw, something happening in Dallas? There have been events that more than, just one individual seemed to have picked up on.
Sure, absolutely. This happens all the time. And 9/11 is a great example, or the Titanic disaster. Yeah. I talk about both of these in my book. Lots of people. But what are they precognizing? Are they precognizing the actual event? in Dallas, or are they precognizing their own reading of a newspaper story, or they're hearing of the story on the news? And in fact, one of the great pioneers in the study of precognition was an aeronautical engineer about a century ago named J.W. Dunn, John William Dunn, who made a sort of a study of his precognitive dreams. And he had this brilliant kind of forensic engineer's mind. He could sort of pick apart. He studied the crashes of test planes, and so he had that kind of investigator's mindset. Well, he applied the same thing to his own dreams, and he was able to determine in every case that a dream that seemed to be about an event was really about his own learning of the event, or the way he learned about the event later. And the way you can tell the difference is if there's a discrepancy. If there's a discrepancy between the actual event in history and the way it's reported or the way you learn about it, well, his dreams always were about the way he learned about it, and he could tell that when there was a discrepancy. The most famous example of this is he dreamed he was on maneuvers, I think in like 1900 or 1901 in the Boer War in South Africa, and he was camped out with his regiment. And he had a dream that he was on a volcano about to explode. And he somehow knew that 4,000 people were about to die. And it was somehow this was a French place. And he kept trying to convince the French authorities to rescue these people who were about to die. The 4,000 people were about to die. Well, then he wakes up, and that day or the next day, the mail arrives. A shipment of mail arrives in his regiment. And the newspaper, the headline in the newspaper is that 40,000 people die on the French island of Martinique when Mont Pelée, this volcano, blew up. And he was stunned by this. I mean, how could he was off by 10 in his number, but 4,000, 40,000, that's pretty close. Well, he later learned that, the actual death toll turned out to be something like 30,000 or 36,000. So, I mean, he wasn't, somehow directly getting information across space-time from that volcano eruption. He was getting a preview of his experience of reading that headline. And his dream sort of dramatized it the way dreams do. But he was precognizing his own future learning experiences. And, he had several great, beautiful examples of this. And in my book, I go through many cases that show the same thing. When you can sort of draw a distinction between an actual event and the way a person learns of the event and what they think about that event, the dream or the precognitive experience is always about the latter. It's not about objective things in objective reality. It's always about our own subjective future states, our future mental states.
We had on, Tim, remember we had on Ben DePorter. He had done a video about, what was the lady's name? Margaret Duncan?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Who was tried in England. She was the last person tried as a witch. And we're talking about what, the late 1940.
Yeah, something like that.
Because she had apparently now, she predicted what was it, Tim? A sinking of a British naval vessel,
right?
And so they thought that the only possible way that she could have done this is that she must have had been in collusion with the enemy or whoever was responsible, I think, for blowing up the ship. But of course, she maintained that she got her information through the etheric, that it was an actual premonition. So some people do, seem to be able to tap into the future to some extent. Unless in her case somebody really did tip her off, but I know what was it? I think the ship had gone down, but it had not been reported in the press. I think, at that time.
But in the process of hauling her in and accusing her, she would find out. She would receive information about that. She may have been precognizing precisely what the investigators told her.
Yeah.
In the process.
Yeah, well, we don't know the or I don't remember the time that she had the premonition as opposed to the time she was arrested for it or something. I'm seeing what you're trying to get at, but we don't know. I can't say that that's the case or it isn't the case.
Yeah,
but,
in most cases there isn't the available. You can't tell for sure what's going on. But
well, Tim, you made a point there that she tapped into the future, but I think that what Eric is saying is kind of the opposite, that the future is tapping into the present.
Well, people make this distinction, but I don't think it's a real distinction.
Okay.
Seeing it's like, okay, let's use the spatial analogy of looking out the window. Okay, seeing a tree out the window. Now, is the tree are the photon? You can describe the photons from the tree coming through the window and into your eye. You can describe it that way, or you can describe yourself as looking out the window. Well, the same thing is happening through time. In quantum physics, it's been perfectly accepted, actually, for a long time, that information and causation can happen in both directions in time. What I argue in this book, and I'm not the first to argue this, is that the brain is an organ that is able to scale up these tiny quantum effects and really basically act as what I call a tesseract. That's a science fiction sort of device, that's a doorway through time. Well, I think the brain is a tesseract. It's information is flowing because of quantum processes being scaled up in the brain. Information is flowing in both directions, and we're able, to a degree, not perfectly by any means, but we're able to a degree receive and make some kind of sense of information flowing from our futures. And I don't remember the point I was trying to make with that.
Well, I had said that.
Okay, so now, is there some point here that science can look back at this and say, well, there is a theory that's workable where we could see into the future? I mean, it seems that parapsychologists kind of stand alone at this, and that those in the scientific community who have and I use credentials in quotes, seem to lack the sensibility to look at anything along this line and even come up with a workable theory.
Yeah, I think it's people in parapsychology. Some people in parapsychology are, I think, at a frontier that is not, most people in mainstream, neuroscience or biology are not quite there yet. But science evolves and advances, and I have a feeling, I kind of if I had to place money on it, I would say that, in 20, 30 years, it's going to be very well accepted that the brain and other living systems, not just the brain, but the brain especially, the nervous systems especially, can receive information from their future. But it's going to be discovering that through the ordinary channels of science is going to, it's going to be research teams that have nothing to do with parapsychology or the paranormal or whatever, and would never in a million years associate themselves with people like me or parapsychologists, now. And, probably this will be, common knowledge in 30 years, but but today's parapsychologists are not going to be even either. They're going to not even warrant more than a footnote in the future, quantum neuroscience of tomorrow that really makes sense of this stuff.
Yeah, when those discoveries are made, you said just a footnote. I mean, there probably will be. I mean, it'll just be like, oh well, some parapsychologists, wrote about something that was somewhat similar.
Exactly.
But we know that they were just a bunch of woo-woos.
Well, exactly, and that's actually the way science goes. I mean, it's the sociology of science. That kind of thing happens all the time. Like Darwin gets credit for discovering the natural selection. Well, it was actually discovered 3 decades before he even spoke about his theory. But because it wasn't, it wasn't expressed quite in the right way, and it was expressed by people who didn't have the right connections, and they weren't in the right place at the right time. We now attribute the idea to Darwin, but it's always more complicated than that when you look at the history of science. So I kind of suspect that that I and other people writing about these phenomena right now are we might get kind of forgotten and swept aside.
Well, that's people
kind of depressing, but whatever.
Well, people have talked about if there is any kind of advancement in the knowledge of UFOs, that when that happens, there'll be a bunch of scientists who will swoop in and make all the claims, while people like Tim Beckley and myself,
yes.
They'll just be like, these guys, they wrote books about it, but we know what they were actually writing about. They're just trying to make money.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. Well, there's the key. There's the key word: trying.
Yeah, trying.
Right.
All right, gentlemen, we are coming up to our top of the hour break. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Eric Wargo and Larry Flaxman on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned. We'll have more.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the second segment of Exploring the Bizarre. Tonight we're talking with Dr. Eric Wargo and Larry Flaxman, and we're talking about time, precognition, the consciousness, reality, or whatever that tends to be. And Larry, I'm going to go, and I know this goes back a little bit for you, but our conversation tonight reminds me a little bit of one of your older books, the Deja Vu Enigma, and a lot of things that that we have been discussing really kind of ties into some of the stuff that you wrote about, that you and Maria wrote about in that book. So when it comes to something like deja vu, I mean, what's the difference, or is there a difference between, say, like something like precognition and phenomena like that?
No, that's a great question, and I think there is a tremendous amount of crossover between those two. Can we go back for the last segment? We kind of were talking a little bit about precognition, and I didn't want to interrupt, but I really wanted to ask a question, and one that I'm, I kind of struggle with as well. So
please do.
I'm a fan. I I completely understand the concept of precognition, and I think there's certainly a lot of credible stories of folks that are able to explain precognitive events. But here's my question about it, and it's something that I've kind of struggled with. As a scientist, and knowing that time is not linear, that in other words, there really is no past, present, or future, that it's now, right? So when you look at it under a scientific lens, the concept of that kind of, it's disturbing to me from the perspective of that would somewhat assume that the future had already been determined, right? So that whole idea of destiny versus free will, is there some sort of, is the future predetermined? And, I don't know that it necessarily is. I mean, if you look apply that to your daily life, right? If you look at events throughout the day, minute changes to your schedule, you're able to kind of manipulate and change the events of the day, right? So I guess this really is the question, how do you explain precognitive events if you really don't believe that the concept of, or that doesn't really resonate with you, the concept of a predetermined future?
Well, the as far as I'm concerned, precognition sort of presupposes a predetermined future. I mean, I guess the most convincing cosmological model, from my standpoint, and a lot of physicists would agree with this, is that of Hermann Minkowski. He was Albert Einstein's math teacher. And he argued that the universe is a big block. We have the three dimensions of space that we're familiar with, and the fourth dimension is time, and that they're all the same, and the future events, even though we can't know them, we don't know them from our present point of view, from this kind of fictional now point of view. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. It's already there. And as a result of that, there are ways that the future can influence the present, and the present can influence the past. The same way that events, over here in one place in space can influence events, in another place. So that's really the kind of model, and that is disturbing to people, because it implies, well, then that my sense of having free will and my sense of the ability to change my destiny is really an illusion. And it raises. I argue that we need to sit with that troubling idea and not just reject it sort of in a knee-jerk kind of way. When I started studying this stuff, I tended to reject it in a knee-jerk way because I didn't like that idea initially. But the more I thought about it, the more persuasive it got. And also, it sort of resonated with my own kind of spiritual beliefs. I'm kind of a Zen person, and that idea of permanence within this kind of illusion of impermanence isn't all that counter to what a lot of Eastern, philosophers would argue. So I've come to love the idea of the block universe, but it's something. This goes back to that taboo I was talking about. People really have it's something that people really have a reaction against, and so I'm just asking people to kind of consider that reaction. Where does that come from?
Well, now, is it possible that some events are changeable, but that the majority of them are not?
Well, you're going to get a lot of different opinions on this. My opinion is no, but a lot of people who write about precognition and ESP argue yes. Kind of the mainstream position, I think, right now in parapsychology is that precognition concerns probable futures, and this idea of probability, of course, is central to quantum physics and so forth. And thus, you precognize, probable events. but you can potentially alter the course of history and all that. I think that I argue in the book that position is not coherent on a sort of deep level, and that it doesn't really make a lot of sense when you really examine it, particularly cases of precognition when you're talking events years in the future and you're precognizing something very precisely. And there's a million cases of this, and I've experienced them very profoundly myself, actually, in my own dreams. And we live in a butterfly effect universe, where any little alteration in my day could have radical effects on future history. So how could I precognize something very precisely a day that I might have, 2 decades in the future, if that future is not really already existing, already kind of set in stone? So I'm kind of taking a contrarian position in this book to what a lot of current parapsychologists would say. But that's all that is to say, is that there are a lot of different. there's a wide range of opinions on this.
Well, okay. I was just gonna say real quick here. It makes me wonder. Then people who have a dream where, say like, they're supposed to take a flight that next day, and they decide, they have a dream that, they're on the flight crashes and they're killed. So they decide not to take the flight, and the flight crashes, but they're not on it and they live. So I wonder if your mind, your consciousness is acting as a editor, narrator, to somehow, I'm not quite sure what it is, even though if your future is already determined, that you weren't going to get onto that plane, but you see yourself dying in it, and then you don't. Is your mind acting as an editor, so to speak?
Well, this goes. You need to realize that the imagination, and that includes the dreams, are not accurate representations of anything. They're very oblique, symbolic, associative representations. And there are a lot of cases, just like you described, where a person dreams that they die in a plane crash, and so they don't take the plane crashes. Well, I'm arguing that what they're precognizing is a mental image that they're going to naturally form on learning that plane crashed. Oh my God, I could have been on that plane. And that's what they're precognizing. They're precognizing, again, their own future reactions, their own future thoughts and feelings in response to, very unsettling learning experiences.
What if it's some type of protection mechanism, kind of like what we talked about with the grandfather paradox and some of the other paradoxes that exist? What if this is some sort of subconscious, deep meta level mechanism that's in place to help us, protect ourselves? What if that's something that's built in that we just don't completely understand, that all of us have access to it at some point, which might explain why some people, most people, in fact, have had some type of precognitive experience at some point in their life. But I don't know. I'm just thinking kind of outside the box. Maybe it's something that is a healthy mechanism and something that is a useful, perhaps it's something, from caveman days that we've inherited that would allow us to further the species. I don't know. I'm just thinking kind of outside the box about it.
It goes way back before caveman days. I mean, this is basic evolutionary bio. I mean, this is, I think it's basic to evolution. And in fact, one of the chapters in my book, I sort of speculate a little bit, but it's grounded, I think, in sort of current frontiers in biology, that this kind of precognition, or this kind of responsiveness to the future, may be the very basis of life. I mean, this may be that kind of X factor that scientists have been looking for centuries, that would sort of separate life from lifeless matter. And that sort of the back in past centuries, they talked about a life force or whatever. Well, it may be something more like this quantum presponsiveness to future rewards, and the basic reward being survival. And so my argument in the book is that in Time Loops is that a nervous system, especially the human nervous system, but basically any nervous system, is a sort of a system that scales up this responsiveness to survival and to future rewards in a big way. And probably on the level of life itself, you're talking on the level of milliseconds, milliseconds ahead, or microseconds, whatever. Just a slight advantage, over kind of random chance is going to be selected for in evolution, and I think this scales up in a nervous system to become much more complex, and to have to do not only with the survival of the organism, but also just the kind of, again, the survival of upheavals and kind of withstanding close calls and challenges in our lives. And so, yes, exactly what you're saying is I totally agree with that this is a system that orients us. Yeah.
So let me take that one step further. What do you think that human physiology? Okay, not human. Do you think that this is strictly a human construct, or do you think that other animals perhaps might have the same type of abilities that we do? For instance, I know that it's very well, and it's very commonly reported trait for dogs, for instance, to know prior to an earthquake, for instance. They'll start barking and howling. Now, obviously, there's a physiological component to that. They can obviously hear much higher than we can. Perhaps that's part of it. But do you think other species have that same ability to access precognitive events that we do?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably even more so than we do. I mean, I think in the human world, we call it intuition. I mean, that's our word for this kind of sixth sense. And but I think it's it's through the animal kingdom. I mean, there was a study a couple of years ago. An experimenter found that planarian worms, these are the simplest animals with a nervous system. It's like I think a few hundred. They have a few hundred neurons, whatever. They're tiny little worms. They can orient away from aversive stimuli a minute in advance. Now, that's astonishing compared, if true. This is just one study. I don't even know how well powered the study was. So, whatever, they'd have to do more research to sort of, replicate it. But the point is, I mean, if that's true, that's astonishing compared to, the best laboratory studies of precognition in humans, show effects, milliseconds ahead, that people in experiments can respond to stimuli, with their autonomic nervous systems, a fraction of a second in the future, or maybe a second. I think 10 seconds is kind of the most anyone has really been able to find in the laboratory for humans. But if you say a whole minute for a very simple organism, it makes sense that what we call precognition is just the tiny little tip of the iceberg of a really much more pervasive, influenced by future events and stimuli in an organism's life, and that they would orient towards survival. And my book offers a mechanism for how that might work.
But there seems to be people who are more adept at this than others. I'm thinking along the lines of, say, like remote viewers. Ingo Swann, comes to mind. I mean, so have any of them tried to come up with an explanation on how this process works for them?
Well, honestly, the most successful living remote viewer is Joe McMoneagle. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've had him on the show, but he hit on this explanation decades ago. In the early '90s, I think his book Mind Trek. Someone wrote to him, how do you think remote viewing works. And he actually realized that, I think that I'm getting the answer from my own future self. That in the future, when I know the answer to the question that has been posed to me now, that is sort of somehow sending back information to me now, and I'm receiving it. And there's an increasing school of thought that that's how basically all psychic phenomena really work. They're all precognition in disguise, and that we're sort of getting information from some future time point at which we will learn what it is we think we're seeing directly across space. So Joe McMoneagle is a perfect example. He sort of hit on this idea very early on. Unfortunately, but again, because of those taboos, people don't pursue this explanation very fiercely. There are more taboos than the ones we've mentioned so far, but there are a lot of reasons people would rather it not be precognition. So that's I think kept people from really pursuing this research.
Well, I can think of an interesting thought experiment along those lines where somebody would be asked to remote view something, and then afterwards be given incorrect information on what they were viewed.
Exactly.
To see if. And never, they're never told the truth. So
exactly.
It's I wonder if anybody's tried that.
As far as I know, they haven't, and that is what's fascinating. That I am not aware of any experiment. It would be very simple, and the way I imagine it is you would take 5 or 10 of your best remote viewers and put them in a room, have them remote view a site. Somewhere in the within 30 miles of the room where you're having them do this, and this is sort of in the style of the early remote viewing experiments. And then, after the session, they all get in a bus, and you take them to the site. Now, in the meanwhile, you have a Confederate who takes and plants a very vivid sculpture right in the middle of that site that they remote viewed. Okay. And when they arrive, they're going to see, the first thing they're going to see is that sculpture. Now, will their drawing or whatever of the site match the site as it was when they were in the room remote viewing, or will it match what they found when they arrived and got off the bus? And that's, it's a very simple manipulation of feedback. And I'm not aware of any studies that have actually done that. And actually, if any of your listeners are aware of such a study, I would love to hear about it. So please email me. You can find my email on my website, thenightshirt.com, and I would love to hear about it. But I'm not aware of any studies that have actually manipulated feedback in that way. That's the simple way of determining this.
That'd be a fascinating thought experiment. This conversation it reminds me that Nikola Tesla one time had an accident in his laboratory where he was struck by an arc of electricity when he was working on his Tesla coil, and he said in that moment, before his assistant was able to hit him with a wooden 2x4 and knock him out of it, that he felt like that he was outside of time and space. He said that he had the perception that he could see the past, present, and future all at one time, and he had difficulty. Once he recovered, he had difficulty trying to verbalize, which right. Tesla was never the man who was short of words, but the only thing that really he could carry away with it was that he felt that that time was an illusion and that everything was happening at once, and it had a big influence on his attempted development of his unified field theory.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great story. There's a great book that your listeners will enjoy that's coming out, I think, in just a couple months, and maybe even coming out this month. It's called Changed in a Flash, and it's by Jeffrey Kripal and Elizabeth Crone. Jeffrey Kripal, you may be aware of. He's a sort of a leading scholar of the paranormal, and he was connected a few years ago with this woman, Elizabeth Crone, who was struck by lightning in the parking lot of her synagogue in 1978, I believe, or 88. Yes, 88, I believe. And afterwards, she started having amazing precognitive. Well, she had a near-death experience and a lot of other interesting paranormal phenomena, but also started precognizing plane crashes and other disasters, very strikingly. And she would even email herself descriptions of her dreams, and then they would come true, the next day or whatever. And so she has a record of these amazing precognitive dreams. So that book is it's like the perfect example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, we'll have to look with that and maybe try to get the author on sometime. All right, we're coming up to the bottom of the hour break. So when we come back, we will continue our conversation about time and consciousness and what have you on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the final segment of Exploring the Bizarre. And it seems, Tim, that we get to this point of the show, and it's amazing how time flies. So we'll have to hurry up and continue our conversation with our guest Eric Wargo and Larry Flaxman. And I'll put this out to both of you gentlemen, and you both can give me your own interpretation of this question. Somebody asked me concerning this show, what is the difference between, say, like predictions and precognition and prophecy or what have you? I know that a lot of people just kind of lump all these things in together, but there is a difference.
Right. I can go ahead and address this. The prediction would be anything that you could use ordinary inference to determine. I can predict, pretty accurately, for instance, that I'm going to get up tomorrow around 6:30 and go to work, and I can predict a lot of things about my day, but I'm doing that not because of anything remarkable, or certainly not ESP. It's simply, it's like I know from experience what my day usually is, and so barring something unforeseen, like a breakdown on the public transportation or something like that, I'm gonna my day is going to unfold a certain way, and you can sort of predict the future that way, and that's what most professional predictors, say the stock market or whatever, are doing, and it's probably what most science fiction writers are doing. They're sort of taking what they know about current trends and sort of extrapolating. Precognition, what we're talking about, is something where you somehow know the future or see the future or are influenced by the future in a way that's sort of outside of that ordinary psychology. And the words like prophecy and precognition and premonition, presentiment, all that, they're all basically the same thing. They're describing the same kind of what we would typically term a paranormal being influenced by the future. So prophecy, that tends to be associated with religion, where a person speaks the future, or I think that's what the technical meaning of the term is, speaking the future, or writing the future. So we might talk about a prophetic text or a prophet who speaks some future event. And premonition typically means having some sort of prediction of a disaster or a death or something negative, or you have a vision or a feeling about some future negative event. Presentiment means feeling the future. That is to say, just kind of a feeling about something that might happen, either good or bad. And precognition is sort of umbrella term for those things.
Mm-hmm. Larry, do you anything
no,
on
I
this?
completely agree. But I think I would add that I think that all prophetic type events really are precognitive, but not all precognitive events are prophetic. Mm-hmm. If that makes any sense. I think really the best way to measure that, or to analyze that, would be that a prophetic event would be one that comes true. If it doesn't come true, then it obviously wasn't a prophecy. It wasn't any type of prophetic experience. So I think, we talked earlier about destiny, and we talked about whether, you believe that the future is predestined. And I think for that prophetic experience to be true, that it's something that would be destined to happen, and it can't be changed. So, even if you look at like religion, religious texts, sometimes you'll hear them speak of false prophets. Well, it's very much the same thing. It's something that is changeable. It's something that's purporting to be something or someone that they are not. So I think the two things are related but different.
This reminds me a lot when we're talking about this about a book that Arthur C. Clarke wrote called Childhood's End. And I don't know if either of you are familiar with that. Sure. But, the book is about the arrival of an alien species to Earth that at first keeps themselves hidden. And then when they finally reveal themselves, they look like the traditional mythological Satan, red with horns and the pointed tail and everything like that. And they admitted that this was the first time that they had visited the Earth, and they speculate that the reason that we have a mythology about demonic creatures shaped and looking just like them was because of this, basically I guess a cultural cry of pain at the end when the human race disappears and is replaced by the next step in evolution. So I mean, very very much. What you're talking about then, Eric, seems to, I mean, of course, it's a science fiction book, but, a lot of the cases that you write about in the book are very reminiscent of this idea.
Yeah, this is something that fascinates me, and in the book I tended to write about experiences that happen within an individual's lifetime, because I think that the brain is really the central unit of precognition, and that we really don't precognize things that we are not going to learn about, have an opportunity to learn about, and that we're not going to be able to learn about before we die. But I do think that there's a way in which cultural traditions could act as a kind of tesseract, the same way the brain does, and that we could potentially be influenced, our culture could be influenced by images and ideas that are off in the future. And this is something that I'm going to write about in the future, in fact. And yeah, I think there's so much interesting evidence of this sort of thing. I'm just thinking of an example that a friend of mine told me. He is has a lot of experience with ayahuasca shamanism, and he was showing me some artwork by shamans in South America that show, they show like cities and flying saucers and very futuristic kind of images. And the standard, explanation for something like that would be, well, that, this is something that the shaman saw on TV or something and was reproducing. But I think that there really could be a way in which, particularly in altered states or whatever, and in sort of an initiatory tradition, like the ayahuasca shamanism, there, these things that are seen in the future could sort of retro influence shamans, through time, and that images from the future could project backwards in time. So it's exactly like what you're describing with Arthur C. Clarke's novel. This is something that's really interesting to me. I don't have any answers to it, but I have that same kind of suspicion that kind of thing is really a powerful force, potentially.
Mm-hmm. Larry, now I know that Tim Beckley asked you this at the first segment of the program, but after we've had this conversation now, and especially talking about the idea of the block universe, do you think that and I realize that this is just speculation on your part. Do you think then that at some time in the future that we will be able to come up with a form of time travel, either physical or mental or whatever? It makes me think of, and I can't remember the name of this priest now, but there's like a priest in the early 1960s who claimed that he had invented a device that he could capture.
Chronovisor.
Yes, that's it. Fascinating story. I mean, do you think that something like this is possible, will be possible, or is happening now or sometime?
Again, I think we are time traveling. I think we have the ability to do it, certainly in the dream state. But as far as physical time travel, it's hard to comprehend the technological capability that would allow us to have that. I mean, one of probably the most prevailing theories of time travel is the utilization of a wormhole. Without really getting into all the details, basically the gist of it is that we would create some type of a ship or a craft, and we would fire ourselves into a wormhole, and then the wormhole would then allow us to drop at hyperspeed, faster than light, through parts of the galaxy to another part of the galaxy, which by proxy would mean that we had somewhat time traveled. The problem with that, though, is that we don't have the technological means to create any exotic material strong enough to protect us from the gravitational waves and pull of that black hole. So that's probably the most possible, I would say, way for us to physically time travel. But I mean, we're still probably hundreds of years away from having the technology, first of all, to even travel to a black hole, and then B, create technology that will allow us to maintain life support and system support within the event horizon of one. So there's a variety of other physical time travel theories that have been put out there. People have talked about rotating magnets. They've talked about lasers. There's tons and tons of ideas about how we could do it. But from a practical perspective, physically, the science just isn't there. We just don't have it. Now, Einstein talks about in special relativity and also in general relativity, he opens the door for time travel and he kind of leaves it open, but there's not really, mathematically it supports it, but logistically and physically, there's really nothing that we have today or in the very near future that would allow us to actually do it. So do I think it's possible at some point? Yeah, I do think it's possible at some point that we can achieve faster than light travel and potentially breach time, space, and travel. Do I think it's going to be anything in any of our lifetimes? Absolutely not. I think that if the technology is ever created, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands, of years in the future.
Right. What about the phenomena of time slips? I've written extensively about this myself, and have talked to a number of people over the years who have, personally had these amazing experiences. And this question is for both of you gentlemen. Do you think that this is an actual experience where somebody is actually viewing either the past or the future, or do you think that there could be another unknown mechanism involved that we don't understand quite yet?
So my opinion on that, and I've read lots and lots of folks that have had experiential time slip experiences. In fact, I've actually even had one. But what I think is happening in a time slip experience, and again, this is just my opinion, there's obviously no hard science behind this, but my opinion is that for a brief moment in time, almost like back in the analog radio days, where as you're tuning between stations on a radio, you would hit that sweet spot where you kind of pick up both stations at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think when a time slip occurs, it's very similar to that, in that you are tuned into two different realities at the exact same time. I don't know if, from the traditional definition of if you would consider that to be true time travel or not. I don't believe so, but I think it's accessing two different parallel realities at the same time. In fact, if you read any of the extensive stories that have been written where people have had, especially experiences where they appear to travel not only in time but also in to different geographic location too. Mm-hmm. There's always slight inconsistencies in their recollections. In other words, there's always something slightly different about the reality of their experience. It's not crystal clear like it would be, in our four-dimensional world. There's always something slightly off. So that makes me think that it's kind of like that static between those two stations, and that you're accessing your reality, your current four-dimensional reality, but you're also somehow kind of breaking the bonds and accessing something completely different. And I think that same mechanism, in fact, is probably the explanation for paranormal phenomena to a large extent as well. When you look at electronic voice phenomena and you look at some of the other quote evidence of the paranormal, there's a lot of similarities in how the data is produced and how it is viewed, and the overall experiential representation of that. So I think it's that same mechanism that allows for ghosts and Bigfoots and chupacabras and anything that you want to consider to be paranormal. I think it's very similar to those types of time slips where people are having experiences where they seem to travel outside of their own reality and time.
All right. And Eric?
Well, here's another possibility that I've written about a bit on my blog, and that's that these are, again, kind of precognition sort of misrecognized as something else. Because one thing that people kind of overlook with time slip experiences is what happens after the time slip, and how does the person find out what it was that they were seeing. And when you sort of zoom in on it that way, sort of look forensically again at these experiences, you in many cases find sort of the same thing that I was describing earlier with J.W. Dunn's precognitive dreams, that you find that the time slip as described by the experiencer matches something that they learned, or something specific about the way they learned about the historic event that they thought that they were seeing directly in the past. So here's an example, actually, that I've written about on my blog. This was in the 1950s, I believe, in a village in Scotland called Dunnican. And a woman was walking home. Her car had actually run off the road. It was sort of in a light snowstorm. She was driving home from a neighboring village one night after a cocktail party. And so she had to walk several miles to get to her home in this village. And on her way home, she saw like all these torches, this line of torches of people that looked like, they looked like ancient soldiers, and that they looked like they were like looking for their dead. And she, this is a weird vision she had. Well, she knew that her village, the hill near her village was historically the site of a very famous battle that occurred in the 6th century called the Battle of Nectansmere. It was between the Picts in Scotland and the Northumbrians who were pursuing them, and the Picts sort of outwitted them and defeated these Northumbrians. And so she kind of imagined that she was seeing these Pictish soldiers looking for their dead in the aftermath of this battle that happened, a millennium and a half in the past. Well, it turned out that like one of the details of what she saw matched something that an archaeologist had written in an article that she subsequently read when she was like trying to read about this vision that she had. It was sort of delving into the history of the Battle of Nectansmere. And like she saw like soldiers like taking this weird roundabout path through this field. Well, it turned out this archaeologist had traced the outlines of this ancient lake that had existed at the time of the battle, and so the soldiers would have had to like take this circuitous path that she'd observed in her vision. So that kind of led people to believe, oh, this was an authentic vision of this battle. But the interesting thing is, subsequently, historians decided that this village wasn't actually the site of that battle at all, that the battle had occurred at this other location in Scotland. And so it's no longer believed to have been the site of that battle. So, and that was determined, after this woman died. So, wow. So it seems like she was having a vision, of things that she was going to learn in the course of trying to investigate her vision. And this is why I call my book Time Loops, because it's about these kind of looping structures. There's a way in which, you have a vision or you have a dream, and then your actions as a result of that contribute to the thing that you wind up seeing. I mean, it's a looping structure. It's not just a one-way influence of the future on the past. I mean, you're also fulfilling it in a way. This is why I say all prophecies are self-fulfilling, and this same structure can be seen in other time loop in other time slip phenomena as well. So this is another way of looking at it, that it's potentially just a kind of precognition of, again, a future learning experience.
Fascinating. Well, gentlemen, unfortunately, we only have about 3 minutes left in the program, so I want to give you both a chance to let our audience know where they can find out more about you, your sites online, where they can find your books, and maybe any upcoming events that you may be participating in. So, Larry, let's start with you.
So you can always keep up with everything that I've got going on my website, which is www.larryflaxman, LarryFlaxman.com. I've got my events listed there, the various places that I'm speaking, etc. My next event that I will be speaking at is in Jefferson, Texas, the first weekend in November. It's a big paranormal conference called History, Haunts, and Legends. And then after that, I've got several things coming up in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and who knows where else.
And what's your current book?
My most recent book?
Yes.
So the most recent book is actually one that we have. It's being done as a re-release, and it's 11/11, the time phenomena.
Oh.
So we've had to go through, and the publishers asked us to basically update it for a 2018 edition. So it's kind of a re-release of that book. But beyond that, the most I guess the most recent book that I've written after that would be my book called Mind Wars, which, well, actually, no, that's not even true. That Mind Wars is my second to latest. I wrote a book, I guess back, September or so of last year. That would probably have been my last one. That was the Demon in Mythology book.
Okay. Well, Eric, I need to, Larry, I need to interrupt you. So, Eric, Time Loops, where can they find you?
Yeah, and it's available, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere online. And my website is thenightshirt.com. All one word. It's and I write about this stuff all the time.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Eric Wargo and Larry Flaxman. Thank you very much for being on Exploring the Bizarre. Tune in next week for another fascinating program. Thanks for listening, all.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the bizarre.